Picture England in the late 14th century, a land where life was as cheerful as a damp sock. Famine, plague, and endless war with France had left the country battered and broke. And just when things couldn't get worse, the government introduced a tax so blunt and unforgiving, it made later poll taxes look gentle by comparison. The poll tax demanded that every adult pay the same amount, noble or peasant, castle or mud hut. Unsurprisingly, resistance brewed. In Essex alone, a third of the population conveniently vanished from the tax rolls. To hunt these ghost taxpayers, commissioners descended on villages. Their methods were humiliating and intrusive. Women were harassed under the pretext of verifying marital status. That was the spark. In Fobbing, Essex, a baker named Thomas Baker decided enough was enough. On May 30th, 1381, he led villagers to confront Tax Commissioner John Bampton in Brentwood. Bampton attempted to arrest 100 villagers on the spot. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The crowd surged, his men fled, authority cracked. That confrontation, one ordinary tradesman refusing to bow, ignited the revolt. The following day, royal officials returned with soldiers. This time the violence escalated. Several of the king's men were killed. The line between protest and rebellion had been crossed. Thomas Baker was a serf, legally bound, restricted in movement, marriage, and work. But the Black Death of 1348 had changed the balance of power. Half the population had died. Labor was suddenly valuable. Peasants demanded higher wages. The elite responded with laws freezing pay and restricting movement. The poll tax was not just financial, it was symbolic. It said, "Know your place," and people were no longer willing to accept that. From Essex and Kent, the revolt expanded outward, county to county. Villagers organized. Tax records were destroyed. Abbeys were forced to submit. In Kent, Abel Kerr led rebels to Lessons Abbey. Documents were seized. Symbols of authority shattered. Across the Thames, boats ferried men and horses between counties. Within days, the movement was no longer local. It was regional. On June 2nd, 1381, leaders in Essex held a coordinated meeting. This was no aimless mob. Their demands were clear. Remove the king's corrupt advisors, abolish oppressive laws, end serfdom. Messages spread in rhymes and coded phrases. One surviving line read, "John Miller and John Carter bid Piers ploughmen go to his work and chastise well Hob the robber." Hob the robber referred to Robert Hales, the treasurer. Chastise well meant far more than a reprimand. This was organized communication, a network stretching across southeastern England. Confidence grew. The rebels surrounded Rochester Castle to free a prisoner, Robert Belling, a runaway serf. Normally, such a fortress would withstand months of siege. Instead, the gates opened. Support for the revolt ran deeper than anyone in authority had anticipated. At Maidstone, the movement needed a figurehead. Enter Wat Tyler, a roofer by trade. Not a noble, not a knight, chosen by common consent. One of his first acts was freeing the radical preacher John Ball, long imprisoned for unlicensed sermons. John Ball preached ideas that shook medieval society. The church should serve the poor. Wealth should not be hoarded. Ordinary people deserved freedom. The revolt now had both a leader and an ideology. It was no longer scattered unrest, it was a movement. And its destination was London. By the 12th day, thousands were advancing toward the capital. In Canterbury, rebels stormed the city, demanding the removal of Archbishop Simon Sudbury. He was absent, already sheltering in London. The march accelerated. Chroniclers claim as many as 60,000 gathered near Blackheath. Whether in one mass or converging waves, the numbers were staggering. They marched with purpose, destroying tax rolls, targeting symbols of power, drawing support as they advanced. While Kentish rebels approached from the south, Essex men advanced from the north of the Thames. Landowners like John Sumner and Robert Pierce joined the cause. Proof this was not simply a starving mob, but a cross-section of rural society. At Coggeshall, a tax collector was executed and records destroyed. At Cressing Temple, headquarters of the Knights Hospitaller under Robert Hales, rebels burned administrative buildings and seized supplies. The attack was deliberate. Strike the financial heart of oppression. By June 11th, coordinated forces were converging on London. King Richard II was just 14. He retreated with his court to the Tower of London. There was no standing army in the capital. Most professional soldiers were abroad. Inside the fortress were the very men the rebels despised, Sudbury and Hales. now suddenly vulnerable. Powerful figures days before, they were now confined behind stone walls, waiting. And astonishingly, it was the teenage king who would have to respond. By June 12th, tens of thousands gathered on the hills outside London. Into that crowd stepped John Ball. He delivered the line that would echo for centuries. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? In the beginning, he argued, there were no lords, no masters, no hierarchy ordained by wealth. The message was simple and revolutionary. A boy king inside the tower. His advisors marked for death, two rebel forces tightening their grip around the capital, and a sermon that challenged the very structure of medieval society. England stood on the edge of transformation. The march into London was about to begin. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share. Every follow helps grow this channel. See you in the next one.